10 years ago on September 11th, someone asked Jonathan Manthorpe who he thought the United States would blame for what had just happened in New York and Washington. He gave an off-the-cuff answer, which he suggests holds up today. Manthorpe is a British-trained journalist who is being posted in hot zones around the globe. He is currently the international affairs columnist with the Vancouver Sun. It is my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Manthorpe back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Hello, Fanny.
Nice to see you.
And you.
A decade removed from that awful day, what are your thoughts?
Well, I said that evening, I said the Americans will attack Afghanistan, but they ought to bomb Riyadh, the Saudi capital. And I still blame the Saudi Arabia primarily for what's happened in the last 10, 20 years with the rise of Islamic radicalism. One has to remember that it was Saudi money and Saudi political will that pushed and financed the creation of these radical madrasas, religious schools, all throughout Pakistan, where Afghan refugees were housed during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. It's there that the radicalism really started with these Wahhabist mullahs that Saudi Arabia didn't want at home. It exported them all. You know, for example, there was a study done for the CIA when they captured about 400 Al-Qaeda members. Of those 400 Al-Qaeda members, over half of them attended mosques with radical mullahs financed and put in place by Saudi Arabia. So one cannot escape the fundamental role of Saudi Arabia in this whole rise of radical Islam in the last 10, 20, 30 years.
So why would the United States of America blame Afghanistan and not bomb Riyadh?
Oil is the easy answer, but you know, clearly the direct threat, the direct attack came from Al-Qaeda hiding out in Afghanistan. So that's where they were. And actually, of course, the initial war to remove the Taliban and remove Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan was very successful. The American military used a very simple and very effective means of doing it. There were very few American allied troops there, some CIA agents who'd operated there during the Soviet occupation, a few special forces, but basically they used the opposition to the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, and funded and armed them. And they removed, of course, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda within a matter of a few weeks and chased them over into Pakistan. Then, of course, things went wrong when the Bush administration started concentrating on Iraq.
Back to Saudi, the royal princes. Where did they fit in this?
Well, you've got to remember that the Saudi royal family is a massive operation. People sort of stopped counting at around 17,000 members. They're all on pensions. They're vast pensions. They're all vastly wealthy. Now, you know, some of them are more radical than others, and there clearly has been, and it's now pretty well documented, that Al-Qaeda was financed and supported, and may still be, because it still exists in Yemen and so forth, by members of the Saudi royal family. And we had this strange situation, of course, that within the three days after the 9/11 attack, 4 plane loads of Saudi royal family members of the bin Laden family, were flown out of the US at the request, I think, of Prince Bandar, who was then the Saudi ambassador to Washington, and I think it has to have been on direct orders from Bush. I can't imagine that at that time, when the whole airspace over the US was closed down, that anything short of a direct order from the president would have allowed planes to leave. And as we know from later things, amongst the passengers on those planes were people who undoubtedly had helped finance the Al-Qaeda members while they were preparing in the United States.
And obviously they flew out on their dime.
They flew out in private jets on their dime, yes.
But the royal princes in 2002, was it 2002?
Yeah.
The royal princes who died
Yeah.
in 1 week, by the hand of whom?
Well, we don't know, and there's never been any admission that they were in fact executed or killed or put to death. The first one, he ostensibly died after some surgery. The second one ostensibly died while racing to his funeral in his car and crashed. the funeral of the first one. The third one, we were just told he died of thirst, which I suppose
really?
is well, in Saudi Arabia, I suppose, he was out in the desert. But I mean, the thing is just too convenient, because these are the three princes who were identified by an Al-Qaeda, senior Al-Qaeda member who was captured in Afghanistan, Pakistan. And he actually produced these names when he thought he was actually being interviewed by Saudi intelligence people, although they were actually Americans. And he was not feeling any stress. He sort of gave these names as people who would vouch for him, and thinking this would get him out of detention. In fact, he was being held in a black prison in Bangkok, in Thailand at the time, although he didn't know it.
Did the death of bin Laden change what is happening in Saudi today, 10 years later? Did it have an effect?
I think it has. Certainly Al-Qaeda, has been whittled down, particularly by the use of the drone aircraft and targeted killings of Al-Qaeda members in Pakistan. But Al-Qaeda still is operating, particularly in in the Yemen. Probably it's got groups in Somalia as well. But it's really not what it was. And I think that there has been a real diminution of its appeal. I mean, if we look at the Arab Spring and the so-called Jasmine Revolution, very few signs of much loyalty or appeal of Al-Qaeda in that.
So you're saying it's more difficult to recruit young men to Al-Qaeda, to extremism, with bin Laden gone? A little more. A
little more. I mean, he still, I'm sure, has an appeal for some people, but that really was not going anywhere. And what he wanted to create really is not very appealing. He wanted to create a caliphate. This is an old Muslim concept of the entire Muslim world being ruled by one person using only Sharia law. He was dead against parliamentary democracy of any kind. I mean, he thought Turkey, which has, even though there's quite strong Islamic strain there, Turkey has a parliament. He was against Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt for the same reason, that they, even though they're pretty hardline conservative Muslims, they backed parliamentary democracy. Same, he hated Hussein and Iran for the same reasons, that they have parliaments. He believed only in the rule of Sharia law, and really that's a very limited appeal to most Muslims.
Arab Spring. What does it mean?
Well, I think there was the concept that because it started at the beginning of this year in Tunisia, there was the concept of, I guess, a fresh look at the Muslim world, and particularly the Arab world in the Middle East, and the sort of revolution that took hold in Eastern Europe in the 1980s and so forth.
Do you think that jihadists or young extremists today are more likely to say, why do we continue to try and take out the West or terrorize the West? Yeah. Perhaps we should handle things in our own country.
I think that's beginning
to
take
democracy.
hold. It's still a very muddled thing, and I think, as you and I have talked about before, Fanny, I mean, this is a generational thing. This is 20 years from now, we may be able to look back and see what happened. But I mean, the inference of your question is quite right. We've seen very, very little appeal of radical Islam in these revolutions so far. It really has been a sort of young middle class revolution of the blogging and tweeting generation, and radical Islam has very little appeal for most of these people.
Jonathan Manthorpe, our guest, he's an international affairs columnist with the Vancouver Sun, and he's been posted in global hotspots for many years. Africa,
Europe, Asia,
all of the above. We'll come back.